Eclipses get treated like cosmic emergencies. I have been watching astrology content about the upcoming lunar eclipse, and the pattern is familiar. Portal opening, life-altering shift. Things you need to do before it is too late. Protect your energy, set intentions, avoid making decisions. The language of emergency, urgency, danger. And I understand why. Eclipses are dramatic celestial events. The sky changes color. The moon goes dark or turns red. Something ancient in the human nervous system responds to that. For thousands of years, eclipses triggered genuine fear. Dragons eating the sun, gods expressing displeasure, omens of war and famine. The fear response is understandable, but it is also outdated. And in 2026, with the tools we have, with the observations we can make, treating an eclipse like an emergency is like treating a thunderstorm like divine punishment. You can do that, but it costs you the ability to read the weather, and reading the weather is more useful than fearing it. Here is what I want to do today. Before we talk about what this Virgo eclipse means, before we get into the astrology of it, I want to explain what a lunar eclipse actually is, the physics, the geometry, the mechanism. Because I have noticed something in a decade of tracking eclipses and their effects on people. The people who understand the mechanism navigate eclipse seasons better than the people who do not. Not because knowledge prevents disruption, because understanding the mechanism converts the disruption from noise into signal. When you know what an eclipse physically does, you can read what it psychologically and energetically does with much more precision. Stay with me on this, even if the physics section feels like a detour. It is the foundation. A lunar eclipse occurs when the Earth passes directly between the Sun and the Moon. That is the entire mechanism. Three bodies in a line: Sun, Earth, Moon. The Earth's body blocks the Sun's light from reaching the Moon. The Moon, which normally reflects sunlight back to us as that bright full moon glow, suddenly finds itself in Earth's shadow. The light source is cut off, and the moon goes dark. Not immediately, not all at once. The shadow moves across the lunar surface over the course of hours. First, penumbral contact, when the outer edge of Earth's shadow begins dimming the moon's brightness. Then partial eclipse, when the dark inner shadow, called the umbra, starts crossing the moon. Then totality, if the geometry is precise enough, when the moon is fully inside the umbra and the bright white disk becomes a deep copper red. The whole process takes roughly 4 to 5 hours from first contact to last. And for the period of totality, which can last anywhere from a few minutes to over an hour, the moon hangs in the sky transformed. Not invisible. Red. Dim. Altered. Still there, but fundamentally changed in appearance. Now here's the detail that matters for everything that follows. The moon does not generate its own light. It reflects the sun's light. When you look at a full moon, you are seeing sunlight bouncing off a rock. The moon has no luminosity of its own. During an eclipse, Earth blocks that borrowed light. And what happens when you take away borrowed light? You see what was always there underneath. The actual surface. The actual color. The actual object, without the illumination that made it look bright and silver and familiar. That is what a lunar eclipse does symbolically, and, I would argue, experientially. It removes borrowed light. It shows you the actual surface of things you have been seeing by reflected illumination. Relationships you thought were bright because they were reflecting something you wanted to see. Habits that looked productive because they were borrowing energy from momentum rather than meaning. Routines that appeared functional because the light you were seeing them by was not your own. The eclipse takes away the borrowed light, and what remains is what was always actually there. Sometimes that is beautiful. Sometimes it is uncomfortable. But it is always true. I want to be precise about the difference between a regular full moon and a lunar eclipse because this distinction matters practically. A full moon happens every 29 and a half days, sun opposite moon. The sun fully illuminates the moon. In astrology, full moons are moments of culmination, completion, revelation. Things come to fullness. Whatever was seeded at the new moon reaches its peak expression. That is a full moon. An eclipse takes that full moon energy and adds the shadow mechanism. The moon reaches fullness and then goes dark. The culmination arrives and then gets obscured. The thing that was coming to completion is suddenly seen in a completely different light, literally, without the borrowed illumination. In a regular full moon, the truth is revealed by brightness. In an eclipse full moon, the truth is revealed by the removal of brightness. It is the difference between turning on a light in a room to see what is there and cutting the power to see what glows on its own. Both show you truth, but the eclipse shows you a different kind of truth, the kind that is only visible when everything else goes quiet. If eclipses are just fancy full moons, why do they not happen every month? This is a question I get asked regularly, and the answer reveals something beautiful about celestial mechanics. The moon's orbital plane is tilted about 5 degrees relative to Earth's orbital plane around the sun. Most months, the moon passes slightly above or below Earth's shadow. It is like two hoops tilted at a slight angle to each other. They intersect at only 2 points. Those intersection points are the lunar nodes, the north node and the south node. And eclipses can only happen when the sun and moon are close to those nodes. When the geometry lines up precisely enough for the shadow to catch the moon instead of missing it. This happens approximately every 6 months, in pairs. One solar eclipse and one lunar eclipse roughly 2 weeks apart. That is eclipse season. And we are entering one right now. The lunar eclipse on March 3rd is the first of this pair. A solar eclipse follows on March 17th. 2 eclipses, 2 weeks, 2 searchlights sweeping through different parts of your life. There is another layer of periodicity that I want to mention because it adds depth to the reading. Eclipses repeat in cycles called Saros cycles. Every 18 years and 11 days, a nearly identical eclipse occurs. The same node, the same degree range, the same axis. If you want to understand what this March 3rd eclipse is bringing, look back to the eclipse that occurred around 18 years ago in the same family. That places us near September 2007, Virgo-Pisces axis. If you were alive and aware then, what was ending in your life around that time? What system was being restructured? What daily reality was being forced to evolve? There is a thread connecting that eclipse to this one. Not identical circumstances, but the same axis being activated, the same polarity being tested. Virgo's demand for functional systems meeting Pisces' insistence on something larger than function alone. There is a physical phenomenon during totality that I find remarkable and metaphorically precise. When the moon is fully inside Earth's umbral shadow, it does not go completely black. It turns red, deep copper, sometimes almost brown, sometimes vivid crimson, depending on atmospheric conditions. The reason is that Earth's atmosphere acts like a lens. It bends a small amount of sunlight around the edges of the planet and into the shadow cone. But the atmosphere scatters the blue wavelengths, the same mechanism that makes our sky blue, and only the red wavelengths survive the bending. So what reaches the moon during totality is filtered light, sunlight that has passed through the entire thickness of Earth's atmosphere and lost everything except red. That is why eclipsed moons are called blood moons. They are illuminated by the last surviving wavelength of light, the light that refuses to scatter, the signal that survives the filter. I want you to hold that image because it maps exactly onto what eclipse seasons do experientially. The eclipse removes the borrowed light. What remains is the signal that survives the filter, the red light, the thing that cannot be scattered by interference, the truth that persists even when everything else is blocked. What you see during eclipse season, the insights, the revelations, the uncomfortable truths, those are the red wavelength truths, the ones that survived every filter. Now let me bring this to the specific eclipse we are tracking. March 3rd, 12 degrees Virgo, a lunar eclipse on the Virgo-Pisces axis. The sun is in Pisces. The moon is in Virgo. The Earth's shadow falls on the Virgo moon. Here is what that means in the context of this axis. Pisces is the sign of unity, dissolution, dreams, imagination, the ocean of everything. Virgo is the sign of discernment, analysis, systems, health, the careful sorting of what works from what does not. They are opposite signs and opposite functions. Pisces says everything is connected. Virgo says, yes, but some connections serve you and some do not. Pisces dissolves boundaries. Virgo draws them with a fine point pen. When a lunar eclipse falls on this axis, with the sun in Pisces and the moon in Virgo, the borrowed light being removed is Piscean light. The dreamy, idealistic, everything is connected illumination that has been flooding this entire week. The Pisces stellium we have been swimming in. That light gets cut. And what remains is the Virgo moon, stripped to its actual surface. The details, the systems, the practical reality. What actually works versus what you imagined was working because the Pisces light was making everything look beautiful and interconnected. Yesterday's Mars-Uranus square was the spark. It cracked open whatever was in the way. The eclipse is the searchlight that follows the crack. It illuminates what the crack revealed. And because this eclipse falls inside the field of Mercury retrograde and the lingering Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the material it illuminates will specifically relate to the structures that arrived on February 20th, the clarity that landed with the conjunction, the things you have been carrying but could not communicate clearly since the retrograde began, the decisions that felt certain underwater but need to survive the removal of borrowed light. The eclipse will show you which parts of what arrived are red wavelength truths and which parts were blue wavelength assumptions that the Pisces atmosphere was carrying. The red survives. The blue scatters. And what remains after March 3rd is the structure you can actually build on. I want to address the fear directly because I know it exists and I know where it comes from. Eclipses feel intense because they are. The removal of borrowed light is not comfortable. Seeing the actual surface of things you have been viewing through a flattering filter is not always pleasant. But intense is not the same as dangerous. A diagnostic scan is intense. It shows you exactly what is happening inside your body. That can be frightening. But the scan itself is not the disease. It is information. And information, especially the kind that survives every filter, is the most valuable thing you can receive. The eclipse is a diagnostic, not a disaster. It reads you. It does not harm you. And the people who approach eclipse season with curiosity instead of fear consistently navigate it better because they are reading the data instead of bracing for impact. I have been tracking eclipse effects on a small group of people for the last 3 eclipse seasons. Approximately 30 individuals who agree to document what surfaces for them during the eclipse window, which I define as 5 days before to 5 days after the exact eclipse. The pattern I have observed is consistent across all 3 seasons. The material that surfaces during eclipse windows is not new. It is not something the eclipse creates from nothing. The eclipse surfaces what already exists, but has been invisible under borrowed light. Relationships that were already strained become obviously strained. Health patterns that were already present become impossible to ignore. Career directions that were already misaligned become starkly visible. Not one person in my tracking group reported something genuinely new appearing at an eclipse. Every single observation was the revelation of something that was already there, hidden in plain sight, maintained by momentum or habit or borrowed illumination. The eclipse did not create the problem. It removed the filter that was hiding it. And that distinction is everything for how you navigate the next 10 days. Here is how to prepare for March 3rd. Not rituals, not intention-setting ceremonies, not crystal grids or sage bundles. Observation tools. First, identify where 12 degrees Virgo falls in your natal chart. If you know your birth chart, find the house that contains 12 degrees Virgo. That house is where the eclipse searchlight will be most focused. If you do not know your chart, tomorrow's video will walk you through this in detail. Second, pay attention to what has been feeling off in your daily systems, routines, and health practices over the past week. Virgo rules the infrastructure of daily life. The eclipse will illuminate the specific infrastructure that needs updating. Whatever has been bugging you quietly about your routine is about to become loud and obvious. Third, write down what you are currently seeing by Pisces light. The dreams, the ideals, the everything is possible energy. Not to dismiss it, to have a record of what it looked like before the filter changes. Some of it will survive the eclipse unchanged. Some of it will look very different on March 4th. The record lets you track the difference. Tomorrow I am getting specific. Which houses, which themes, what the Virgo-Pisces axis activates for each rising sign. That video personalizes everything we covered today. The mechanics are universal. The expression is individual. And the individual expression is where the real navigation happens. Here's where it lands. 5 days until the eclipse. The week behind us built the pressure. Conjunction, retrograde, Pisces immersion, Mars-Uranus disruption. Each layer preparing the field for the eclipse to read. And the eclipse will read the field with a precision that only happens twice a year. Not an emergency, a diagnostic. Not a portal, a searchlight. Not something to fear, something to read. The ability to read it is the difference between being disrupted by eclipse season and being informed by it. That is what this channel is for. And starting now, we are in the eclipse window. 5 days. The build has begun. I will walk you through every one of them.